Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Prescott.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning. This is wonderful. Hello, YouTube. My name is Hildy Gottlieb, and I am the author of The Pollyanna Principles, Reinventing Nonprofit Organizations to Create the Future of Our World. And we are indeed creating the future right now with every action we take. Today's reality is the result of thousands of actions and decisions and occurrences that happened in the unchangeable past. We cannot change the past, and we cannot change the present. As organizations and as individuals, however, we can indeed create the future. And we are doing so right now, whether we do so consciously or not. Those are the opening words to the Pollyanna Principles. And in the book, I go on to talk about the future that I would like to create. And I'm going to guess that it is very similar to the futures that you all want to create. We all want healthy, vibrant communities. We all want resilient, compassionate places to live. And that's why most of us got into this work in the first place. That's why you're doing the work that you do, because this is the difference we want to make. The question that has driven the work that my business partner Dimitri Petropoulos and I have been doing for the past 11 years is this one then. With all the work we're doing, and nobody could ever say we're not, any of you not working hard enough? Nobody could ever say we're not working hard enough. With the millions of people around the world who are employed in this sector, and the millions of volunteers, and the millions of board members, and the billions of dollars, if this is the sector that was supposed to change the world, how come the world hasn't changed yet? And that is the question that has driven the work that Dimitri and I have been doing for the past 11 years. It is critically important to us because in 1993 we changed our lives to do this work. The work that we were doing prior to this, both of us have very strong community organizing backgrounds, but we also came right out of business turnaround. And in 1993, we had the opportunity to buy the business turnaround company that we were working at. And we sort of looked at each other and Dimitri's wife and said, you know, we don't really want to be doing this. What we want to do is take these business turnaround skills and make the world a better place. We want to know that when we wake up in the morning, we go to bed at night, that the world is a better place for what we had done. And about 5 years into that, in 1998, we were doing great. Our business was good. It was all by referral, which is sort of consultant nirvana when everything is by referral. We were doing governance work, and we were doing strategic planning, and we were doing resource development planning. And we suddenly looked up and realized that the reason we'd gotten into doing that work, no matter how good everybody thought we weren't making a difference. We were doing a strategic plan for a food bank, and yet had we never even done that plan, and they never implemented it, their community would be no closer to ending hunger. We said, what is this all about? Well, being the practical sorts, if any of you have ever done business turnaround, there is nothing more practical than business turnaround. And so we did what you do in business turnaround. You rip it apart, you put it back together again, and you see what works. And so we started to pull it apart, and we started to say, why is all this work not working? We found two reasons. The first reason is that the work we're doing doesn't aim at creating extraordinary communities. The work we're doing isn't aiming at creating an extraordinary future. What it's doing is focusing on today. Now, that's not to say today isn't important. Today is critically important. We want to provide arts and theater performances today. We want to clean the environment today. We want to take care of abused babies today. But we also need to be looking at the future we're creating. The second reason we found that we're not creating extraordinary change is even if we were aiming at it, our tools don't aim at that. Strategic planning and governance and resource development don't aim at creating an extraordinary future. And so being the practitioners that we were, we said, okay, if this tool isn't working, let's create another one. And we started to bust up everything, strategic planning and governance and resource development. And we tried a lot of stuff. Well, this seems to be working. Well, this doesn't, so we won't do that anymore. And this seems to be aiming groups at more change, and we'll keep doing that. And the more we started to codify and put things together that were aiming organizations in all those internal ways, of doing their work more focused both on today and the future, we found that those things that worked all adhered to certain principles. And that the things that weren't working either didn't adhere to those principles or actually went counter to them. And those are where the Pollyanna Principles come from. They are not airy-fairy, we're all going to hold hands and sing the Age of Aquarius. We're not going to ask you to do all kinds of drawing of pictures. These are really practical. These are practical principles that came interesting enough for us, not from, well, here are the principles that have to happen and let's create some stuff. First we created what worked and then said, why is it working? And what we found is that they adhered to those principles. What the principles will show, and I will share with you today, is that creating visionary change in our communities and our world is not only possible, it is practical and it is doable. So let's start breaking that down and see how do we make visionary community change practical and doable in this region and in the world. Pollyanna Principle number 1 and number 2 focus on the end results we want to create for our communities. This one seems pretty simple, right? We accomplish what we hold ourselves accountable for. We pretty much all would know that intuitively, right? Okay? And when it comes to accountability, if you have been in community work at all, and if you've been in community work for longer than, maybe, I don't know, 10 minutes, then you know that accountability rests with the board. That when we're talking accountability, we're talking about boards and governance. And any of you who have taken a governance class, or your board has been through training, or you've seen things on the web, we know what we're accountable for, right? We're accountable for the dollars. We're accountable for human resources. We look at standards of excellence that are out there, and we look at the 10 things every board member must do, or 12 things every board member must do, and we all know what we're told we're accountable for. We have fiduciary obligations. We have the duty of care, duty of loyalty. Those of you who've been through this have absolutely heard these things. When we looked at governance, here's what we found. What we're told we're accountable for is legal oversight, right? We're accountable for operational oversight, what's going on. The board is accountable for what the executive director is doing. And then what we've sort of come to call board mechanics. And that's just the sort of stuff of doing a board. Recruitment and orientation and setting the agenda. And really, when we're taught, this is what we are taught we're accountable for. There's a piece that we are rarely taught. And that is the role of leadership. Leadership on behalf of our communities. And when we look at things like standards and lists, what we find is if we talk about leadership at all, we talk about it as make sure you've gone over your mission statement. Make sure your mission statement is still relevant. But now, the rest of it all focuses on 100,000 questions. Are you doing this? Are you doing that? Are you doing this? Here's what we found when we looked at this. What we are being encouraged to be accountable for, these right here, are the means. And that this one right here, leadership, is really all about the end results that we create for our communities. If we are asking ourselves to hold ourselves accountable for creating change in our communities, this is where it happens. But we're not taught how to do that, are we? No, we're taught about all the rest of it. And when we see things going on, how many of you got onto your boards because you love balance sheets? Why did we get onto the boards that we're on? To make a difference, because we care. How much time are you spending at your board meetings talking about what you care about? Are any of you spending the vast majority of each and every board member talking about the things that you're passionate about? No, we're not, and we wonder why boards are disengaged. What we're looking at is symptoms of the fact that governance has been asking us to focus on the means and hold ourselves accountable for the means and not the ends. So if it is true that we accomplish what we hold ourselves accountable for, what does that make possible? We can hold ourselves accountable for creating significant change in our communities. we can hold ourselves accountable for the end results that we create, and then within that, hold ourselves accountable for the means. It doesn't negate that we are, in fact, accountable for the means. But first and foremost, we can focus on the end results that are the most important. In the Pollyanna Principles, we show a case study, a very long case study, going through step by step of how a board can transform itself to really hold itself accountable for the end results that they want to achieve and accountable for the means. But one of the things that we ask boards all the time is if your organization survives and is strong, and the community is no better off, is that success? We focus so much on this. Is it success if the community is no better off? So if what we're going to be looking at is holding ourselves accountable for the end results, how do we do that? How do we aim at that success? That brings us to Pollyanna Principle number 2. Pollyanna Principle number 2 states that each and every one of us is creating the future with everything we do, whether we do so consciously or not. And we sort of know that. We know that the way we got here is really just a result of cause and effect that got us here, and that we are the causes that are going to create future effects. We know that. How can we hold ourselves accountable then for creating the future we consciously want to create? Well, we all know how we create the future in organizations. We plan, right? We do planning. And we do strategic planning because we know and we have been taught that strategic planning is our organization at its best. This is when we're going to plan to accomplish what we can accomplish. Do we plan to create an extraordinary future for our communities? Do we ask the question, what is our community going to be like in 10 years, and 50 years, and 100 years because we exist? No, we don't. What we plan for in a big, really strategic plan is 5 years. How many of you guys have actually gone out 5 years in your plans? Okay. Some of you may have gone out 10 years. I mean, and everybody goes, wow, 10 years. We don't know what's going to happen in 10 years. But mostly we're looking at 2-year plans. And what we're hearing now is a trend that says it's so unpredictable what's going to happen in 2 years that we should only do 1-year plans. What we are planning for is today. And more to the point, what we're planning about is what we don't like about today. We are planning to fix what we don't like about today. And we are rooting our plans, tethering our plans solidly in what we don't like about today. We do needs assessments, we do environmental scans, we do SWOT analyses where we look at our current strengths and weaknesses and our current opportunities and threats, the current environment in our community, the current needs. Oh my gosh, we need to know where we are. Now we're told that our strategic plan is a roadmap to the future, right? Yeah, we've all heard that analogy. Okay, so I drew a map. You'll quickly see why I'm not the artist in the group that Dimitri is. This is the best I can do. I have in our office actually drawn the United States, and they tell me to please not do that again, so I won't. Let's say that we were going to take a road trip from Prescott to New York City. Okay, we are here in Prescott, Arizona, and we're going to go to New York City. And actually, Dimitri and I did that last year. We put 9,000 miles on our car doing a tour of, I can't even remember, I think it was 20 states, and went into Canada to share this message. So we're going to drive from Prescott to New York City. And here's how we're going to do it. We're going to study all the roads in Prescott. Because we got to know where we are, right? There may be ice on some of those roads, so we're going to listen to the highway report to see what's going on in Prescott. We're going to ask our neighbors, you're going to put your trash out tomorrow? Because I need to know, because I'm going to go to New York City. And we're going to spend 95% of our time looking at Prescott, Arizona. It's going to be a bumpy ride, guys, and you may never get to New York. Well, when I say 95% of our time, people usually say to me, oh, come on, we don't spend that much time focused on the present when we're doing our plans. Well, how about this? We spend a month, maybe 2 months doing a needs assessment. We spend a month, maybe 2 months doing an environmental scan. We hire a consultant to help us do all of that. Then we take 6 hours, if we're lucky, with our boards, and we quote-unquote create the future. We are rooting, tethering our plans to what we don't like about today. And then hoping somehow a miracle will occur and we will get to the future we want to create. So if the Pollyanna Principle holds true, that we're creating the future, whether we do so consciously or not, what does that make possible? Here's what we found. We can plan to consciously create the future. And it's not airy-fairy, and it's not the age of Aquarius. It is what we do all the time. It is what each and every one of you does all the time. Question for you guys. I need to be at the airport. What time should I set my alarm for? What's the question you're going to ask me? What time is my flight? And what am I going to do? I'm going to figure it out backwards. I'm going to say, okay, my flight is at noon. Probably leave about 2 hours for security. That'll take me down to 10. Take about an hour to get to the airport. That'll take me down to 9. I still have to pack. I still have some laundry to do. I got to deal with the dog. I got to get up at 4:30. I probably shouldn't go to sleep. You've now heard how we pack for most of our trips. But we do this with everything. If you're planning a dinner party, my guests are arriving at 7. I want to make sure that dinner is ready by 8. I got to have everything in the oven by this time. I got to set the table. We work backwards in every single thing we do. What time do I need to leave the office to get my kid to soccer on time? Everything we do, we work backwards, except planning for our organizations. In our organizations, we root ourselves in the present, and we plan as far out as we might possibly predict we could see. And so we can say, what is the vision, just like you guys asked at your tables, what is the vision for what is possible in our communities? That's what we want to tether our plans to. That's what we want to root ourselves to. And then we ask, well, what conditions would need to be in place in the community for that to happen? Well, we'd need to have this in the community, we'd need to have that, people would need to be like this. Okay, well, what conditions would lead to that? Well, they'd need to have this and they'd need to have that, and we work our way backwards. We look at the cause and effect we know we are part of, and we consciously create the cause and effect by reverse engineering the future we want to create. And then we get to something that says, you know what? Wait, we could actually do this piece right here and this piece right here. And now we are walking and taking steps forward to create the future we want, rather than reacting to the present that we don't like. In the Pollyanna Principles, I share 3 case studies. We have done this planning. The thing that charged us the most in 1998, when we had that sort of mind switch, was a strategic plan we had done. And so we've been doing strategic planning the longest. And we actually don't call it strategic planning anymore. We call it community impact planning, because that's what we're about, community impact. We show 3 examples in the Pollyanna Principles, 3 case studies: a recovery organization, a university leadership program, and a public broadcast system. And what all of those show is that it is practical and doable, and you'll see the amazing results these guys came up with and started to implement. But what you'll also see is that we're not talking about predicting the future. We're not talking about scenario planning, which some of you may have been involved in at certain times. And scenario planning is where you take 3 or 4 of what you think predicting might be likely scenarios and play them all out of what might happen and what might we do to prepare for that. It's not that. We're not predicting. We're creating. We're creating the cause and effect that we can step towards the future we want, instead of constantly reacting to the present that we don't want. So if that is what success looks like, and if we are holding ourselves accountable for creating that future, then we need to know that the means we use are aligned behind that. When I was a kid and I was learning to drive, I was 16, and I was, surprise, I was a little high-strung as a 16-year-old. I'm a little high-strung as a 51-year-old. And I was crazed. I mean, I'm behind the wheel of this car, and I am so nervous, and the car is just swaying all over the place. And my poor dad, God bless him, says, "Pull over. Stop the car. What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm watching the road." And he said, "If you look where you're going, the car will go there. If we look where we're headed, the car will go there. So if we align our means behind our end results and don't use means that go counter to those end results, our car will go there. So let's start looking at the Pollyanna principles that address the issues of the means that we use to get our car where we want it to go. Pollyanna principle number 3 states that everyone and everything is interconnected and interdependent, whether or not we acknowledge that. It's another one of those, these are not going to be earth-shattering. When you read these principles, you're looking up and you're going, well, yeah. So is this how we currently function? Well, we know that everything is interrelated. Is what happens in Prescott going to affect Prescott Valley and Chino Valley?
Yeah.
Yes, it will. Yes, it will. Is what happens, I'll get a bigger yes, is what happens in Phoenix going to affect Prescott?
Yeah.
How did I know that? What happens in all the states surrounding us here in Arizona affect us. What happens in Mexico affects us. What happens in Washington, D.C. affects us. And what happens here affects everybody else. And we know that the moon, which is a lot farther away than even Washington, D.C., has a huge effect on us. Everything is interrelated and interdependent. Our organizations each have huge impact on each other. And yet we create these walls. We have got walls between organizations, and then we've got walls between the disciplines of those organizations, so the arts and the environment. Well, we can't really deal with that because that's arts and we're really an environmental group. And then, I love this one, within human services we have to have different disciplines within there, because goodness knows mental health, and well, it's not really related to poverty, but it might be. And then we've got real good walls. This one's a good one, is between funders and providers. Because that wall also comes with a staircase, because there's that hierarchy where funders certainly don't see providers as peers. It is the rare funder, and we are blessed to have one of them here today, that really understands that we are all doing the same thing, we're just doing different parts of it. But normally that's not true. We've got good solid walls between funders and providers. And then we've got great walls between our organizations and the communities and the people that we serve, work with, come visit us, because we're the experts and we do work for them. And we've got that separation. And I can prove to you that we separate ourselves from our communities in one expression. When we need to really figure out what's going on and get support from our communities and engage with them, what do we call that? We call that going out to the community. Right? Any of you ever said, we need to go out to the community and see what they think, as if we are not they and they are not we. We are all part of the same thing. We are all interconnected. We are all interdependent. And as I say this, you all know that none of you can do any of this alone. When we start talking about creating the visionary change that's possible, organizations always tell us the same thing. Well, we can't do this on our own. And you know what? They're absolutely right. We can't. So if Pollyanna principle number 3 says that everything and everyone is interconnected and interdependent, what does that make possible? We have power together that we don't have alone. And what it makes possible is anything. The question that you guys were focusing on before, what is possible if we all work together? Absolutely anything. Our interconnectedness is our power. Picture a single drop of water. Not a lot of power in a single drop of water. Actually, a single drop of water lands on your hand, you go like this, and it's gone. But if we've got a drop and 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 a drop, now we got a bucket full of water. We can do something with that. And then we got a bathtub full of water. And then we got a pond full of water. And by the time we're done, we've got a raging river full of water. And is there power in a river? Of course there is. Just ask Hoover Dam, ask Tennessee Valley Authority. We power entire cities, communities, regions with that combination of drops. Here's the fun part about looking at a river, though. Can you identify an individual drop in there? You can't. It is not when we collaborate as individual organizations where this is my turf, and this is my turf, and this is my turf, and we'll do this because it is in our best enlightened self-interest. It's when we lose that, and we cooperate, and we act as one community, that we have got that power and that strength just like that river. So if it is true, then, that we have that power, how do we need to act with each other? Pollyanna Principle number 4 says that being the change we want to see means walking the talk of our values. We all hear that line all the time. We want to be the change we want to see. We don't really know what exactly does that mean. Well, what it really means is walking our talk. And sometimes we don't walk our talk. All of us do or don't at various times in our lives. And one of the best examples of not walking our talk, how many of you guys are Jon Stewart fans? Yeah? Okay, I am probably the biggest Jon Stewart fan there is on the planet. And so Jon Stewart, if you're listening on YouTube, call me. We love Jon Stewart. Why do we love Jon Stewart? Jon Stewart points out the hypocrisy in absolutely everything. In everything. And it's fun. He doesn't care if you're a Democrat, if you're a Republican, if you're liberal or conservative, left wing, right. He doesn't care. Hypocrisy is fun to point out. Except, of course, when you're pointing it out for me. And then it's not so fun. If you want me to walk my talk, that's a way different thing because I'm not so sure about that. I could give you, and once I start giving you some examples, you'll think of your own because we've got banks of them. We pay attention to them. We were working, we weren't working, and you'll soon see why we chose not to work with this group. There was a group that called us in to talk about some issues that they were having, wanted us to do some planning. This was a domestic violence organization. And their vision, as we talk about what's possible, their vision was what you would sort of expect from a DV organization. They wanted people to learn to deal with their anger differently. They wanted a community where people dealt with each other in respect and compassion. It's sort of what you would expect from the vision of a domestic violence organization: respect, compassion. And the board of this organization was so abusive to their staff that the staff unionized. Now, is that modeling the behaviors we want to see in the community? Is that being the change we want to see? No, of course it's not. Well, we go from a small local organization like that to the sad and unfortunate poster child of not walking the talk. And that is the largest organization in the world, and that is the American Red Cross. And I really, really wish, I plead, if I had a beg for YouTube, I would plead that the Red Cross would stop giving me so much material to write about. Because I have written blog posts, I have written white papers. The Red Cross, when we think about all the things with the Red Cross, we remember that stuff messed up after 9/11, and then we remember that they had problems after Katrina. And we know that the Red Cross has probably gone through more CEOs in the past 10 years than I've probably, changed my socks. And yet there is something that the Red Cross has done that we're not that aware of. I want to read it because I want to make sure I get it right. But this is something for which the American Red Cross paid almost $10 million in fines to the Food and Drug Administration. $10 million in fines. According to the FDA, the Red Cross failed to ensure the safety of the nation's blood supply. Food and Drug Administrator inspectors found that some Red Cross blood centers would keep testing blood until the tests delivered the desired results. For instance, blood that tested borderline positive for a given virus, which you would think would be thrown out, would be retested 5 or 6 times until the numbers came out negative. When we're talking about being the change we want to see, when we're talking about walking the talk, here's what happened at the Red Cross. And it's not so different than what happens with us frequently. Blood for the Red Cross is money. And so their decision was, we need the money, we'll test and we'll test. Now, how many times do we make decisions based on money? Where we say, oh, I don't really know, but the money is just sitting there and is waiting for us. And so if being the change that we want to see means walking the talk of our values, what does that make possible? We can model to the community the behaviors we want to see. We can be more conscious of the talk that we want to walk. We can ask the questions ahead of time and have a code of values that not only sits in our lobby and looks real pretty, but that we actually use for our decision making. We can ask the question, when we have tough decisions to make, how will we know which one is the right one? We can ask the question ahead of time, are there groups from whom it is not okay to accept donations? And we can know that ahead of time because we will not have that pile of money sitting on the table. You guys have all been there. When you are a recovery organization and there is a $50,000 potential donation from the local beer distributor, what happens? That pile of money starts talking to you, doesn't it? It's got like its own values. It's the devil on your shoulder, and it sits there and it talks. Come on, you know you could make payroll for 6 months with this. It talks to us. Well, if we've made the decisions beforehand, there's no right and wrong decision. For some folks, it is absolutely right. That's the talk they want to walk. They know they need those dollars, and they figure out how to make it work. And for some folks, it's absolutely not right. But those are the talk you want to make sure you know beforehand, and that we are sure that we can walk that. Because when we model our behaviors to the community, all of those things that people say are impossible, we're showing them it's not. You know, those people will never work together. Well, we show them that we will. Those people will never make their decisions. They'll always take the money. Well, we show them that maybe we won't. What we're doing is modeling the change that we want to see. What we find happens when the decisions are hard. And I want to talk for just a second about values and what it is to walk your talk, because when we talk about values with groups, that's the point where folks have who have very little tolerance for what, it's why I called the book The Pollyanna Principles, to be honest. For, you know, oh, you Pollyannas, you know, just stop. People who have very little patience for that, they don't want to hear about vision and values. That's all that touchy-feely stuff. That's all that mumbo-jumbo, right? Values are the single most practical thing we can talk about. Is there anything more practical than deciding, do we accept donations or not? Is there anything more practical, any of you, than an organization that is so abusive to its staff that it unionizes? That's practical. One of the reasons, I will share with you, one of the reasons that I don't use PowerPoint, that I use flip charts as often as I can, and when I get into a room that's bigger than this, I'll use an overhead, is because if we're talking about interconnectedness and engagement, there's nothing as disengaging as a PowerPoint presentation in a dark room with a red dot. But you guys just watched me with a pen in my hand circle something, and it's in real handwriting. To us, that's a values decision. To us, that's a values decision. And so it's the little things. There's nothing more practical than a flip chart and a pen. But it's the little things. When we fail to walk our talk, 9 times out of 10, it's out of fear. Frequently about money, sometimes about something else. When we're not walking our talk, it is usually out of fear. So how can we make sure that we're not in a position of fear and that we are able to be the change we want to see? That brings us to the next Pollyanna Principle. Pollyanna Principle number 5. Strength builds upon our strengths, not our weaknesses. Again, this is one of those, yeah, okay, so. And if we're strong, we're not going to feel that fear that might lead us to not walk our talk. So are we strong? No, we're not. We have no money. And we have no volunteers, and we have no good board members, because the good board members, they sit on that board over there. They're not going to sit on our board because we're just small and grassroots, and they all want to be on the big, high-profile board. And the board members we have, well, some of them are okay, but they don't know any rich people, and so how are we going to get any money if our board members don't know any rich people? And it just sucks to be us, doesn't it? We know that strength builds on strength when it comes to our community members. We know that if we've seen the work of the Asset-Based Community Development Institute, if you've seen strength-based initiatives like St. Luke's is doing so well in Phoenix, you know that if we build on the strength of our community members, we build something really strong. And yet we don't think of that internally at all. Our community members, they're real strong. We're horrible. It's just really, really bad out there. Well, is it? Could it possibly be that bad out there? Do we not have anything positive to build on? The further we look at how negatively we think about ourselves, we realize that we have actually created a label for our work, the label we use for ourselves, that is a screaming banner of negativity and need. We are non-profit organizations. We are non-profit organizations. What does that mean we're talking about? It means we're talking about what we're not. And what are we not? Our name says we have no money. Great name. Talk about reinforcing our feelings of fear. So what we need to be conscious of as we move forward is that language counts, just like it counts with our clients. Language counts with us. We are community benefit organizations. We are social benefit organizations. We are humanity benefit organizations. We exist to do something positive, and we do something positive. So we need to first stop calling ourselves something that's really, really negative and really self-inflicting. Now, when we're out in the world, I'm sure many of you have sort of heard that sort of expression, all those rich people, they all stick together. Right? Rich people, they all stick together. We're hearing that a lot now with all the debates about the stimulus package on the Hill. Rich people, they pretty much stick together, right? We ever hear that poor people stick together? We don't, do we? Because when you've got nothing, you're really closed in. You're really trying to focus on yourself and you're trying to survive. When we think we have nothing, that's what we do. We build those walls. So those walls that we talked about before, we've built them. We have built them. They may exist legally, but we are separate legally and part of a whole. If we look at the cells in our body, they are separate living organisms, part of something bigger. We can only feel that when we feel strong. And so if it is true that strength builds on our strength and that we can accomplish amazing things when we are strong, what does that make possible? Here's what we have found. We have a ton of strength internally within our organizations that we just forget about. We have assets to build on that are incredible. And that when Dimitri and I have worked with clients in the past and we start showing them their assets and eliciting from them, well, tell us about this and tell us about that, they all, to the client we've ever had, look at us and say, we had no idea we had this much. Let me share with you some of the assets that you have. And you will find these in the Pollyanna Principles. We have mission-related assets. And that is what we do, the work we do. We have human assets. That is who we know, who your board knows, who your staff knows, who your volunteers know. And I'm not just talking about the fact that they may know the mayor, or they may know the police chief or the school principal. They may know just regular people who live in their neighborhood, who have so much to share with your organization. Our physical assets and resources are what we have. It could be a parking lot. It could be a room. It could be computers. It could be a copy machine. A friend of mine has told me that one of the most valued assets in a community that people overlook is your copy machine. How many people in your community, especially low-income people who are constantly having to fill out forms in triplicate, could use a copy machine? Wow, my copy machine is a tool of engagement. And finally, we have community assets, which is the mission assets, the human assets, and the physical assets of everybody else. It's a room like this, and all of the facilities that Prescott College has, but that everybody else has. It's community centers, it's libraries. What we show in the Pollyanna Principles is two different things. The first is how we can build programs based entirely on shared resources. And so if we think about, well, you know what, we're going to need to have transportation, and we think, well, you know what, there's trucks in our community and people are already running around. Well, we're going to need to store stuff. You know, there's warehouses and somebody already has one. So how do we build programs on shared community assets and resources? That's in the Pollyanna Principles. But the other thing we also show is how you can build income streams on the assets you already have. And I see some crinkled brows. Income streams? How could we do that? How do wealthy people stay wealthy? Do they work for, does Bill Gates work for a living? Spend lots of time working, puts in, 20-hour days like we do in the community benefit sector, huh? No, Bill Gates and wealthy individuals make their money off what they already have. And so if we look, as we describe in the book, different ways of assessing how might we generate more resource off of what we have, we find we have tons to work with. And when we have that feeling of wealth, we can start to interconnect more fluidly with others, all aimed at that future we want to create. We frequently hear about doing strength-based work and asset-based work and values-based work as if it's the end-all and be-all. And I need to remind you that if we focus on the means without focusing on visionary end results, we'll do strength-based work aimed at today's problems, instead of strength-based work aimed at the future that we want to create. All of these systems working together brings us to the last of the Pollyanna Principles. And that is that individuals will go where systems lead them. Individuals will go where systems lead them. Typically, when things start to fall apart and everybody's blaming everybody else, that's an indication that the system is failing, not those individuals failing. If boards everywhere around the world, and I talk to them and so I know, if boards everywhere around the world are candidates for board development, if boards everywhere around the world are the equivalent of the Consultants Full Employment Act, then it's not that we are genetically predisposed to be bad board members. There is a system that isn't working. If planning is focusing us on what's right in front of us instead of what's down the road, that's a system that isn't working. And if resource development requires us to compete and then complains that we do, that's a system that's not working. When we are out in communities, and we travel all over the world, and when we're in communities, we offer the funders in those communities, would you like us to convene the funders around a conversation just like this, to talk about, you're already investing millions of dollars in your community, what is stopping those dollars from creating more change? And eventually those funders get around to the same thing we hear all the time. There's so many nonprofits in our community and they're all competing with each other. And so we look at those funders and we ask them, do you have a competitive grant process? Some of them get it when I'm asking the question. Some of them don't. They say, of course we do. To which we say, well, why do you think they're competing? We have created the systems and then we complain that the system is actually working quite well. So if, in fact, individuals will go where systems lead them, what does that make possible? We can create new systems. We can create new systems. We can create governance systems that aim boards at the results they want to see in their communities, not just in 2 years, but in 10 years, and 50 years, and 100 years. We can create planning systems that aim us in that direction. We can create funding and resource development and resource sharing systems that allow us and encourage us and inspire us to work cooperatively rather than screaming and yelling that we don't when in fact we're told we shouldn't. We can create the systems, we can be the change we want to see. And that's what the Pollyanna Principles are all about. We can create systems based on our fears, or we can create systems based on inspiration. We can create systems based on the things that we know are not possible. Or we can create systems based on the fact that pretty much anything is possible. And so in closing, I want to share with you one of my mentors and role models. And this is the gentleman to whom I was the first dedication in the book as you open the book. And that is the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And when we think about Reverend King and we think about the Pollyanna Principles, did he focus on the interconnectedness of everyone? Did he use means that created a raging river out of everyone together? Of course he did. Was he being the change he wanted to see? Was he walking his talk? If nonviolence is evidence of anything, it is evidence of someone who said, I will not sink so low as to use the very methods that have been used to oppress us. Did he see strengths in a people that everybody said have no strength? Yeah. And did he create systems that would outlive him, that would remain in place? Yes, he did. But it wasn't just the means. He held himself personally accountable for being the change, for creating the future he wanted to see. If the I Have a Dream speech is anything, it is a speech about creating the future. Now, I share with you all of this about the Reverend King. I need to share something else about the Reverend King. He is a horrible role model. He's a horrible role model. One reason, none of us think we can be him. We think of Reverend King, we think of Mahatma Gandhi, and we think they're gods. You know, oh, but that was Dr. King. I could never be like that. So I want to share a different role model with you. I want to share with you the role model of Rick Carter. Rick Carter is head of the Human Service Federation in the Midwest town of Lincoln, Nebraska. You guys think you could maybe be Rick Carter, who heads the Human Services Federation? Now we're talking. Now we're talking. Let me tell you what Rick did. As the head of the Human Services Federation, Rick was asked, let me take my glasses off because there's just a smidge of glare out there. Rick was asked, as most of us are when you're in, if you head a coalition, then you've been asked to please facilitate a plan. Please facilitate a strategic plan for one of the members of the Human Services Federation. This organization happened to be Nebraskans Against the Death Penalty. And so Rick said, sure, I'd be happy to. And in facilitating this plan, the first thing he said is, okay, well, what have you been doing? Well, like most advocacy groups that are sort of out of favor with the legislature, they were doing what you'll recognize. They were waiting. They were waiting for the legislature to change, to become more favorable. They were writing letters to the editor. They were writing editorials in the local paper. They were holding rallies and vigils. They were protesting. And so Rick said, okay, well, let's define for Nebraskans Against the Death Penalty, what would success look like? And they said, well, we'd abolish the death penalty. He said, all right, that's what we're hanging our plan on. We're going to aim at that, and we're going to work our way backwards to see what happens. This was in 2006. This was actually in the middle of 2006. And when Nebraskans Against the Death Penalty entered the 2006 legislative session in Nebraska, they could count 6 votes out of the 49 in the legislature. They weren't going anywhere. They weren't even going to get a floor discussion, forget getting a floor vote. And they certainly weren't going to win anything. By the end of that 2006 legislative session, few months later, they not only got a floor discussion, they got a floor vote. And I wish I could tell you that on this first time out of the chute, they won. But they lost 25 to 24. But the story's not over. And the story's not over because as exciting as that was to me, and I tell you, I still get chills when I think that that happens so fast. The reason it happens fast is we take the blinders off and we aim at it. But here's what happened after that. Several months later, I'm reading the New York Times and I pick it up and I go, oh my goodness. And the first thing I do is pick up the phone and I called Rick and I said, tell me what happened. What happened was that Nebraskans Against the Death Penalty also looked at the courts. They knew that there's the legislature and there's the courts. And because there was only one form of legal capital punishment in Nebraska, the electric chair. They had a judge that ruled that the electric chair is cruel and unusual punishment and was unconstitutional. And within 12 to 18 months of doing that plan, Nebraskans Against the Death Penalty eliminated the death penalty in the state of Nebraska. What we think is impossible is not impossible. Unless something is scientifically impossible, it is possible. It may not be likely. It may not be right around the corner in our minds. It may be improbable. But 100 years ago, putting a man on the moon weren't going to happen. 200 years ago, if someone had said an African American will be president of the United States of America, we'd say, that's impossible. It's not impossible. Creating visionary change in our communities is not only possible, it is practical and it is doable. And the only thing left for us to do is to get to work. So thank you, and I look forward to the rest of the day.